Welcome to Democratic Television, where we learn a lot from our always thoughtful guests. Today, our focus is on the federal government and, in particular, the United States Census. And we're delighted to have with us Raymond Mueller, who is a partnership specialist for the US Census. Welcome to the show, Ray.
Thank you for having me, Bill. I really appreciate it.
I'm glad to have you here. So how often do we do the census? Maybe some folks know what the census is, but when does it come up and how often do we do it?
So the United States Census has been being taken since 1790, every decade, so every 10 years, and the decennial census is done in order to get a full count of the residents of the United States. Mm-hmm. However, in between those 10 years, we do about 130 surveys a year. So we're actually always going with some form of a survey.
I see, interesting. And in the every 10-year census, the kind of big one, the full count, it sounds like a good way to be sure of what's going on, but there's also a reason why we do it. It's not just that it's a good idea.
Well, you know, it is in the Constitution, mm-hmm. In fact. It was stated that it would be held within 3 years of the first Congress being set, and then every 10 years thereafter. And so again, since 1790.
Interesting. So in the history of census, that first one would have been really challenging to take, I imagine, and very different than what we're doing now.
It would. In fact, you can tell we societally have changed drastically. So the majority of that count was about being free, white, over 18, and a man.
Wow.
And whereas now we've gotten to the point where you can include you identify yourself as you see yourself. Mm-hmm. We have same-sex couples on the survey. We also have the choice of putting as many of the racial background that you consider yourself up to 5. You can write those in.
I see.
So lots of change.
Interesting. So the census that we're taking this time is coming up soon. What's the general timeline for the census this year?
So the decennial census is going to be held on April the 1st, as it always is. And no, I don't know why it's on April Fool's Day. But we'll be doing it on April the 1st, and in advance we'll mail out some invitations to every resident in the United States, and we're going to count every resident. We're going to count them one time, and we're going to count them where they live.
I see. So the census is sort of about where people are as opposed to who they are. You're going to mail it to residences and ask who's there and what's the information that the census would like to gather about them.
It's like a portrait of America, a snapshot of that moment in time.
I see.
So you can look back, and at this moment, if you wanted, you could go back and look at every census between 1790 and 1940 and even see details of those if you wanted to look up, say, where your family lived in 1940.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So the census, I think that for many people, they're familiar with filling out a form and mailing it in. I think people are aware that there's some door-to-door work that goes on in the census. But in the modern era, what is this census going to look like? How's it going to start, and what should people expect?
Well, you know, this time we're doing the opportunity for folks to go online and fill their census out online, so we don't have to print so many of those forms. Mm-hmm. We're going to be offering that census online or by phone for those folks who would rather use a phone than modern technology. And we'll also be offering it in 12 languages in those two ways, the 12 primary languages that are used outside of English. And in addition to that, for folks who speak other languages, for instance, Twi, or some of the languages that are not as widely spoken, those will be available as assistance guides and glossaries. And we've got up to 59 different non-English languages available for that.
I see. How will residents know where to go? How will they know when it's time to go online and how to log in, things like that?
So we're going to mail out an invitation to every resident. And we went back and last year we checked in with all of the municipalities and asked them to provide us new addresses. We did what's called a address canvassing, where we went around and checked all of the addresses that there are to ensure that we have the best address list, and we mail out invitations to the resident, not residents, rather, not the resident. So not the person, but the
everyone
house.
Who lives at that address.
So yeah, we send it to the house, and then one person kind of takes charge, their person 1, and everybody else gets put onto the form.
That's interesting. Do the cities keep up with things like back apartments and ADUs and things like that? Places that have kind of multiple discrete places?
So obviously, every city wants to keep track of where their residents are, and in some cases they do a little bit more of that. During our address canvassing, part of our purpose was to go and take a look and see if there is a new unit being built on the property. Does it say mailbox A and B where it used to be just a single mailbox?
I see.
So part of our address canvassing was to discover some of those other places so that we can be sure that we send to both mailboxes that are there now.
I see. So I think a lot of folks would probably not be surprised to realize that the census is more or less ongoing to try to have that strong address list and to keep track of changes in population in between the decennial censuses. I'm curious about your role and how the census sort of builds up a team to get ready to do the big census, the full count.
Well, so this is my third decennial census. I actually was an enumerator in 1990 back in North Chicago, Illinois.
I could guess what that is, but just say, what does an enumerator
enumerator
actually
is the person that goes out and does
people?
the knocking on the door in the non-response follow-up mode.
I see.
In 2010, I had just stepped away from the AIDS Coalition because, as we all know, 2008 hit nonprofit pretty hard, and I happened upon this job where I was working in the office of the census. And while I was there, it segued into this opportunity to be a partnership specialist, doing outreach specifically to the LGBTQ community, because at that time it was the first time we could mark same-sex married on the form and it would count.
Right.
And there was a major
Now, which
push.
census was that?
That was
just the last one?
2010.
Yeah, wow, amazing.
So another one of those big changes.
Right, amazing. And so you started to allude to this, but a partnership specialist, it sounds like you're in particular focused on outreach to communities that might be harder to reach in terms of getting information to them about the census and how to complete it.
So my summary of what we do is we are paving the road to the 2020 census. We as a team go out, we try to create partnerships with trusted voices within the community to ensure that all of our harder to count communities are aware of the census, aware of its importance, and made a little bit more comfortable with it. As we all know, this is a time where we have a lot of questions in the air. And one of those questions was whether we were going to have a question about citizenship. And one of the things that's been very important for us to get across is no. The Supreme Court flat out said that that cannot go on this decennial census. There is a process by which a census is changed, and we can go through those steps perhaps for the next one.
Yeah. Well, I know that that's been a little controversial, and some folks have worried that just the question arising maybe would affect the census. Are there any special measures that the census is undertaking to assure immigrant communities, for example, which may have households with a mix of documented and undocumented people, are more comfortable in filling out the census? And should they be comfortable? Are there protections that should make them feel comfortable?
So again, I'm going to use the word trusted voices. We've been reaching out to our trusted voices, whether they be elected officials, people who are in, that little lady on the corner that everybody knows and they know she knows everything.
Right.
We would love to talk to her and have her help talk to the neighbors. We talk to people like yourself. And as you know, you've allowed me to speak at some of the Democratic meetings to get the point across, because those who are involved in other activities within the community tend to be the people that I can talk to that will make sure this happens. What we do is we make sure that they get the word and they understand, because I could speak for an hour and some people will only hear that I'm a federal employee.
Right.
Whereas you,
which is like half a step away from an immigration agent in their mind.
And because
but they
it's
don't
all
really have
together.
to be afraid of that, right? The one thing about the census and this area of sensitivity to privacy, I'm sure that the census policymakers and your education materials try to address the fact that people might have a concern about privacy. What protections are in place? Or should people feel like their information is going to be secure from misuse, even by those outside the government or even within the government?
So we do need to address the fact that there was a use of our census data during World War II, and the census was requested more information on communities of Japanese descent because they wanted to know where they were in order to create the internment camps. 2 years after World War II, the Congress, the Senate, the legislative and the executive branches got together and created Title 13. Title 13 locks down all census data, so no personally identifiable information or even business identifiable information can be shared from the surveys that we take, for 72 years.
Right.
So for instance, as I mentioned, you can look at the 1940 census right now and you can see who was living where, but you can't look at 1950 for another couple of years because that won't be released till then. And this does come with a fine of up to $250,000 for census employees like myself and 5 years imprisonment. And to be quite frank, I can't afford either of those.
Right. Who would want to be imprisoned? So even at the highest levels, and just to say it openly, there's been concern about misuse of government information. It sounds like so long as the individual and census employees in Washington uphold the oath that you referred to and will be concerned about the penalties that you mentioned, that it shouldn't be possible for other agencies to really get individual information, personally identifying information.
It is a part of the U.S. Code, Title 13, and so it would require a new law to be written, and it must then be passed by obviously the legislative branch and signed on by the executive branch at that time in order to change the situation and make it available to anyone.
Very good. So trusted voices, it sounds like your job might be to go to those who are trusted within a community that's hard to reach and get them to trust you and the census to begin with and work with you to share the information.
It is, and this process has been going on for a couple of years. That we have some of our biggest partners include the County of Santa Clara, City of San Jose, the Santa Clara County Office of Education. These are folks that have signed on early on and have been doing work for a year or more. And in each case, they've got employees that are working just in that realm to make sure that the people that they're dealing with are well aware of what's happening, when it's happening, and why it's important.
Good. Well, we've talked a bit about the people that you're trying to reach, and one question people have that's, I know, a compelling point as well is how important it is to gather the information. And part of that is what sort of things flow from the gathering of the information. Can you talk a little bit about that? How is information used?
So within the sphere we're in right now, the Democratic Party, what's important to this group, the number of representatives that we have in the state of California is based on our population. It is potentially possible that we could lose a couple of those representatives. And it's not because we're losing population, it's because we're not rising as fast as some other states.
Right.
So we don't have that big of a growth. It's possible that we will lose a couple of
And that's fair, that's
voices.
how things work, but as long as everybody's really counted, and we wouldn't want to lose a voice because we missed some people. Right?
That's exactly why it's so
Right.
important.
Yeah.
Secondarily, the redistricting of all of our situations, whether that's the new council districts that have just been drawn in the city of Santa Clara, or whether it's the Congressman Khanna's district.
Right.
Those will all be redrawn based on the population from this year. We have to provide information to the executive branch by the end of 2020, and then we have to provide information to the redistricting committees, like there's been forming lately, by March of 21.
So they have that data to be able to draw their lines. And then, of course, there's federal funding and even state funding and other formulas that are driven by it.
$675 billion a year in federal funding is applied based on population. And so I like to remind people that, if you're paying federal taxes and you do not get counted, your taxes will not come back here to work on our roads or our hospitals or our schools. They'll be spread out amongst the rest of the nation because you weren't there.
Right.
So for 10 years, the money you put into the pot doesn't come back to your family and your community.
So it's pretty important that everybody be counted. Well, thank you for this first segment of our show. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk a bit about those populations that are hard to reach and what the census does and his plans to do to reach them, and also jobs and anything else that comes up. So thank you very much for the first half.
Thank you.
Santa Clara County voters, get ready for your new voting experience. All voters will receive a ballot in the mail weeks before the election. When filling out your ballot, completely fill in the bubble with blue or black ink. Please make sure to sign, date, and write your place of residency on the back of the envelope. Now your ballot is ready to be mailed with the postage-paid return envelope. All valid ballots mailed before or postmarked on Election Day will be counted as long as they are received within 3 days following Election Day. We have many drop boxes throughout Santa Clara County. Go to sccvote.org/Dropbox to find a drop box near you. You can also return your completed ballot at any one of our brand new full-service vote centers, which open up to 10 days before Election Day. You can check to see if your ballot was received by visiting sccvote.org. Under Popular Services, click Vote by Mail Tracking, then answer the following prompts to check the status of your ballot. Thank you for your part in upholding democracy. To learn more, visit sccvote.org.
We're back for the second half of our show with Raymond Mueller from the US Census. Welcome back, Ray.
Thank you again.
So we talked a little bit about the strategies that the census uses and that you use in your work to reach especially hard to reach communities. What are some of those communities and what sort of factors make them hard for the census to reach and ensure that they're counted?
It is interesting. Most people would probably fall into one of these categories, but you've got communities of color, people who don't necessarily speak English as their first language. The LGBTQ community, interestingly enough, and children under 5. The most undercounted population in 2010 were children under 5. Now, obviously, they were failing at their job of filling out their form.
Yes. Well, who should have filled out the form in that case?
Well, theoretically, the parents would be handling that. But if a child's living in 2 houses and they're not talking, they may not think who's going to do this.
I see.
There's a variety of reasons. Big data was a big concern then. There were fears in 10 as well, and having children in big data. But what happens, however, is now for the last 10 years, those kids have been in the school system and they've been involved in all of these things where funding is needed.
I see.
And they weren't counted.
Yes, I see.
So.
And what are the populations? Are there other populations that are, imagine that homeless people, for example, or transient people have a hard time being counted.
So this is the Census Bureau is, again, an ongoing operation, but the decennial census is the largest peacetime operation in the history of the United States. And so there are operations happening where we're going to go out and count people in those camps. We're going to count people in dorms and group quarters. The camps is called the Temporary Non-Specific Outdoor Locations, which is TNCL. And that TNCL operation is going to happen on midnight of April the 1st to about 6 in the morning, where they go out to the camps and count them.
Right.
So there are so many different aspects of this in the operations department. It's fascinating how it all comes together. It's like the world's largest startup.
So they sort of have a strategy about each individual population and finding them where they are and getting them counted.
Absolutely, absolutely, and counting them again where they live.
Yes.
And in fact, this time, if a person who doesn't have, is suffering from homelessness, they can go online at their local library. They can fill out the form and they can put the city and the state and the zip code they're in, and they could put a description such as St. James Park.
Right.
As their place of normal residence, rather
Right.
than having an actual residence.
I see. So let's talk about the timeline for the census. I think people will be interested to know how they're going to find out that it's time for them to complete the form.
So as I mentioned, we will be mailing out an invitation to the majority of all residences in the United States. There are a few residences that do not receive mail, and in those cases, we'll send someone out to actually knock on their door, and if they're not there, they'll leave a form. If people do not respond every 10 days or so, we're going to send a reminder, whether it's a postcard or a letter. Finally, close to the end of
Will
April.
they receive in the first mailing a form that they can fill out, or is it more, here's a form that tells you where to call or where to go online to fill out the form?
Close to the end of April, we will send a letter that includes a form.
If
We
they
are
haven't
trying to
already
avoid
responded.
that.
I see.
Yeah. And then at the end of April, we'll send one more reminder before we start sending out people. Now, the important point, though, is that not every household speaks English, and we are addressing that by making sure there's a language assistance form in every one of the letters that goes out. Person will be able to go down through there, see which one they recognize, and they'll read in their own language which website to go to and which phone number to call. That will take them directly to their assistance in their language.
I see.
They don't have to go through a communications tree at the phone on the phone.
Or even the website to go hunting for their page.
Exactly.
Wonderful. And so this is the kind of obstacle to people taking care of business like this. They don't know how long it's going to take, or whether they need to get their cable bill together so they have their all their information. What sort of information will people need to have available when they go, let's say, online to fill out the form, and how long should they expect it to take?
So this is the most basic of information. Things such as your name, your date of birth, age, how long you've been in that residence. They do ask for the household a few things, such as we request a phone number and email address, because if something's missing or we need to follow up, rather than come out and knock on their door, we'd rather just call. So if folks are willing to give us that, and it's, again, only used for this. Once it's done, we don't need that ever again.
Right.
The form, as far as the length of time, it will depend on the number of residents.
I see.
But there are just the basic statistics. And I will tell you that you'll have to actually provide more information to DoorDash to deliver your pizza that you're going to eat while you're doing it than you would for the census. We never ask for social security numbers. We never ask for credit card numbers. We never ask for that sort of information because we don't need that. All we need is basic demographics, and they're the same demographics you would most often find at the end of any questionnaire you fill out.
So for populations that are vulnerable to fraud, older people and really all of us, they shouldn't expect someone to call and say they're from the census and they need their password to their bank account or their social security number.
Absolutely not. We never ask for that. In fact, there was a recent fraudulent piece of mail sent out by a political party that looked like a census.
I see.
And it was interesting because they asked for a $15 fee to process their census answers.
Right.
And again, we don't ask for money. We don't ask for any of those information.
So shouldn't be giving credit cards or any
Not at
financial
all.
information at all?
Not at all.
Very good. And so you mentioned that I note that some of the populations that have been identified as hard to reach are homeless people or people in rural areas, people in tribal areas. And it's a long drive out there, so I'm sure the census would like folks to get online if they're able to. But it will take quite a workforce to go out and count people who need to be reached in that physical way. And I'm just wondering, what kind of operation is that? Have you had a role in trying to ramp up that workforce?
So we've been working on recruiting now for well over a year. The idea was to get a large pile of applicants, a large pool that we could bring from. And we have to realize some of these people applied in January of last year, so some of them may have moved on, they may have a job, they don't want to do this. So what we do is we go through and we have thousands of these applications. And as with any job that's hiring large numbers now, it is kind of weeded through as far as at a computer level for specific things, make sure they're qualified. And then we started calling folks the day after Christmas. We started calling individuals and saying, hey, are you still interested? Making sure they're still up for this, letting them know some of the opportunities that are coming. We've hired most of the supervisory at this point, and they're being trained now. The training for the enumerators, which are the people that go out and do the actual knocking on the doors, that's going to be done in April because, again, we want people to fill this out in April, be done. We're not going to have people out knocking on doors until May, and that's called the non-response follow-up. And we'll be hiring about another 3,000 people here in Santa Clara County alone.
Wow, 3,000 people. And how long of a stint is it for an enumerator, let's say?
Well, we hope people are going to do this, so we're hoping, they're going to do it on their own, so we're hoping it's not going to be long. However, a person's hired for an 8-week assignment. That 8-week assignment may end after a week or two if there's not a lot of work. However, if a person's really wanting to work, there is the opportunity to work in other areas where we didn't necessarily have as many people apply or where there's more work to be done.
I see.
Give you an idea of what can happen. We're paying $30 an hour, which is the top for the United States, and we're paying people that because this is a big job, it's important, and we want to make sure we get good quality candidates.
Right.
If a person works 25 hours a week for those 8 weeks, they're going to make about $6,000.
Right.
I think they can get 2 tickets to Disney for that.
Wow, something like that. So $30 an hour, because the cost of living here is high and there's a pretty almost full employment, so it must be hard to find workers. What does the census have kind of a profile of a person that they consider to be a good candidate for this kind of job?
Well, we have worked with a lot of different populations. So for months we've been going out to senior lunches. Folks that are already retired that just have a few hours, because this is evenings, weekends, and it is relatively part-time. I mean, you can work longer if you've got the time. But we've been working with those folks. Teachers' unions, because teachers generally are done around 4 in the afternoon, so they can go out for a few hours in the evening and they've got their weekends free. And anyone that's available that has that time. We don't recommend people plan on this as their primary source of income. They need to plan on it more as a topping on the answer.
And I'll ask you in a minute to give contact information because people might have questions about other subjects, specifically about jobs. Is there a place that folks should go to get information about jobs and maybe to apply if they feel it might be a fit for them?
Absolutely. So they can go to 2020census.gov/jobs to apply, and they can go online to apply. There is no other way to apply. It takes about 30 minutes to apply because there is a bit of an exam, and they'll want to go ahead and just go in line and do that.
Very good, thank you. And for folks who have questions of you, and let's say they're a potential trusted partner or trusted party, how would they reach you?
So anyone can reach me through my email address, which is raymond.c.mueller@2020census.gov.
Great.
Or my phone number, which is actually an LA area code because I work out of the LA office, is 818-983-2995.
Thank you. We'll put that on the screen as well. Your area of responsibility, you mentioned that you're organizationally within the Los Angeles organization of the census. What's the scope geographically of the work that you're doing personally?
So I'm the team lead for the partnership group here in Santa Clara County, and my specialties are the elected officials, government, and the schools and education programs. So I've been doing a lot of work with the school boards and the city councils and such.
Very good. So for groups that feel that they might have a constructive role to play, in, particularly in reaching a hard-to-count community, are there still opportunities to work with the census, and how would they find out about those and get connected?
So this year, for the first time, the money all came from the state, so there's been a lot of grant funding going on, and Silicon Valley Community Foundation was a part of that grant funding. So there are organizations that have money. Groups that didn't necessarily get money yet, there are even some micro grants being given out. For instance, the County Office of Education is offering micro grants to school districts specifically to do events around census.
How would one find out about this sort of thing? Contacting you, or is there information on the census site?
They can also go to, there's the County Office of Education here for Santa Clara County. You can go to sccoe.org. They have a whole segment about census. You can also go to the County of Santa Clara, has an office of the census, and they have more information on that. Because again, I'm limited to what we're doing, and a lot of that other thing, these other things were happening around us. And I do want to make sure we applaud them, because this is huge. 10 years ago, there were 20 people in my work staff. This year, there are 6 of us right now.
Wow.
But the county and the state and the cities have come in and filled in all of those gaps, and I've seen so much going on.
Right.
It's quite incredible.
So for trusted voices that are already engaged or that are becoming engaged, what are the next things that they should be doing? What are their next steps? Or?
Well, we want to make sure that we share it out to our constituents. Everyone should be sharing it out via their social networks. If you're putting out emails, put a little tag at the bottom, make sure you count, shape your future, and apply it to your groups. So for instance, the Democratic Party could be mentioning the fact that we could be losing representatives.
Right.
And it would be important that we do that.
Yes, I agree.
Secondly, we want to make sure that everyone in their own household is counted. I don't care who they are, if they are here all the time, if they're here on a short visa. You want to make sure everyone that's there is counted, because they do count regardless of their status, regardless of who they are, and whether they're living in your garage or your basement, they still count.
Well, that's a good note to end on, because the census is all about being counted, and so thank you for sharing all the information about the census, Ray.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it, Bill.
Thank you for joining us on Democratic Television. If you want to engage with the Democratic Party, you can find us online at www.sccdp.org. We'll see you on the campaign trail. Thank you.